Before we begin, take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss any stories full of mystery, suspense, and frightening revelations. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from now? Your city could appear in a future story. Montreval Castle rested on a rocky hill in the Occitanie region, surrounded by gnarled cypress trees and abandoned fields that seemed to have been forgotten by time. Built in the 13th century, it had been for generations a symbol of feudal power. Now it was merely a decaying structure, officially closed by the French government due to structural risks. But it still attracted curious onlookers, independent historians, and urban adventurers. Claire Moreau parked her car on the dirt road nearly 500 meters from the main entrance. The cold October wind pierced her coat as she adjusted her backpack and switched on the portable recorder attached to the strap. An investigative journalist from Marseille, Claire had spent the last 3 years covering local corruption cases and real estate fraud. This was different. It all started with an anonymous email. The message was short, written in archaic French mixed with modern expressions. It spoke of the sealed dungeons and warned that the contents hidden there should never be revealed. Attached to the text was an old map of the castle, with an area marked in red under the east wing. At first, Claire ignored it. He frequently received strange messages. But 3 days later, a second email arrived, this time with recent photos of the dungeon's interior. The images showed damp stone walls, rusty chains still attached to their hooks, and a heavy modern metal door, clearly installed decades after the original construction. That information was not recorded in any public records. Claire requested access to the Montreval Municipal Archives and discovered something even more disturbing. All the documentation relating to the castle's basement had been removed in 1987, replaced by blank pages stamped as classified. That's where the conflict began. As Claire walked along the path covered in dry leaves, another car pulled up on the opposite side of the hill. Out stepped Etienne Lacroix, an employee of the French Ministry of Culture. Tall, with a rigid posture and a perpetually neutral expression, Etienne was known behind the scenes as someone too efficient, the kind of man sent to solve sensitive problems. He wasn't there to preserve historical heritage. He had received direct orders from Paris to ensure that no one had access to the dungeons that week. A small group of engineers would arrive in 2 days to permanently seal the lower tunnels, citing geological risk. Officially, it was a matter of public safety. Unofficially, Etienne knew there was something down there that shouldn't be seen. He carried with him a thin dossier without logos, containing only 10 pages. No photographs, no detailed descriptions, just one sentence underlined in red. The exposure of this content could generate unpredictable social repercussions. Claire reached the castle's main gate shortly after 4 in the afternoon. The gates were open, likely broken open months before by urban explorers. She entered without hesitation, her footsteps echoing through the empty inner courtyard. The silence was oppressive. Fragments of broken stained glass gleamed in the dim sunlight, and pigeons took flight from the towers at the sound. Claire walked through partially collapsed corridors, past halls where decaying tapestries still hung from the walls. His map indicated a hidden staircase behind the old chapel. She reached it after 15 minutes of cautious exploration. She pushed open a wooden door swollen with dampness and found stone steps spiraling down, swallowed by darkness. It was at that moment that he noticed recent marks on the floor. Footprints. They weren't old. The dust had been disturbed just a few hours before. As Claire turned on her flashlight and began to descend, Etienne walked along the outside of the castle, speaking softly on the phone. "Yes, she's arrived," he said. "No, we can't intervene yet. I need to confirm if it's really her." He hung up and looked at one of the broken windows in the east wing. I knew exactly where Claire was going. Deep within the castle, the air grew colder with each step. The musty smell gave way to something metallic, almost like rust mixed with damp earth. The walls narrowed, and makeshift electrical conduits protruded from the ancient stones, clear evidence of modern interventions. Claire stopped in front of a grey steel door, marked with faded numbers and a triangular symbol. She touched the icy surface. There was no visible lock, just a small digital panel that switched off. Before he could capture the scene with his camera, he heard footsteps echoing behind him. Boards, controlled. She turned, her heart racing, as the flashlight's beam caught the silhouette of a man standing at the beginning of the hallway. "You shouldn't be here," Etienne said firmly. Claire didn't respond immediately. She just picked up the camera. "Then explain why the French government is hiding what's behind that door." His gaze hardened. At that moment, Claire understood that she wasn't just investigating a historical curiosity. I was about to cross a boundary that had been carefully protected for decades, and anything locked away in that dungeon had been deemed dangerous enough to erase official records, mobilize state agents, and frighten someone powerful enough to send anonymous messages. The real terror wasn't in the castle. It was in what they were trying to hide. The underground corridor stretched for almost 50 meters, narrow enough for Claire to feel the damp walls brush against her shoulders. The flashlight revealed almost faded inscriptions on the stone. Religious symbols mixed with markings that didn't belong to any known order. Small crosses, circles cut in half, and words in distorted Latin appeared and disappeared as the light advanced. Etienne walked a few steps behind, keeping a calculated distance. "This castle has undergone several restorations," he said, breaking the silence. "Most of what you see down here isn't medieval. It was reinforced during the Cold War." Claire didn't answer. She preferred to record the surroundings with her camera, capturing details, improvised electrical cables, old sensors attached to the walls, remnants of plastic boxes with faded labels. None of that was recorded in the public archives. Montreval had always been a discreet village, known for its family-run wineries and small Sunday markets. The older residents avoided talking about the castle. They would only say that it wasn't a good place for children, and that for decades military trucks would appear at night, always without license plates. Claire remembered her conversation with Madame Roussel, the owner of the local bakery. The woman had stopped kneading the dough upon hearing the name of the dungeons. "There was a winter in 1986, he said in a low voice. "People disappeared, not many, 2 here, 1 there. The police said they had fled, but nobody flees leaving everything behind." These stories never made it to the national newspapers. Claire knew this pattern well. Small communities, hushed-up events, redacted reports. She made her way to a fork in the tunnel. The old map indicated that the right branch led to the original 13th century cells, the left to a later structure built directly into the rock. "It's that way," said Etienne, pointing to the left. "How do you know?" He hesitated for a moment. "I've been here before." That simple sentence carried more weight than any lengthy explanation. Claire began to observe him more closely. Etienne Lacroix was about 45 years old, with dark hair that was always neatly trimmed and a small, healed cut on his left jaw. He wore discreet clothes, too functional for a simple civil servant. She knew who he was. His name appeared in several cultural preservation projects involving sensitive sites. Former German bunkers in Normandy, abandoned facilities on the Italian border, historical archives in Strasbourg, always in operations that ended with areas closed to the public, always without interviews. On the other side, Etienne had also researched Claire. He knew about her reporting on inflated contracts and the disappearance of digital evidence in corruption cases. He knew she didn't give up easily. That was precisely why he had been sent. They arrived at a circular room, carved directly into the rock. In the center, there was an old, dust-covered metal table surrounded by broken chairs. On the walls, empty supports indicated where screens or equipment had been hastily removed. Claire knelt down and ran her fingers over dark marks on the floor. "Blood," he murmured. Etienne neither confirmed nor denied it. Post-war France had hidden many things under the pretext of national security. Medical experiments conducted in isolated hospitals, psychological projects inherited from German research, behavioral observation programs discreetly funded during the 1970s and 80s. Claire was beginning to realize that Montreval was just another point in this silent network. A metallic clang echoed at the end of the tunnel. They both turned around at the same time. They were not alone. From behind a column emerged Luc Bernard, a former soldier currently employed as a private security guard. Claire recognized him immediately. He had appeared in leaked images linked to a surveillance company that operated for the government in rural areas. Luc kept his hand near the holster, although he hadn't drawn his weapon. "We have movement on the surface," he informed, looking at Etienne. "2 cars. Probably curious onlookers." Etienne took a deep breath. "Speed up the protocol." Claire stood up. "Protocol for what?" He finally looked the journalist directly in the eye, "To ensure that what is here remains buried." Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. She began to understand the true antagonist of that story. It wasn't just Etienne, nor Luc. It was an entire system built over decades, specializing in erasing traces, silencing witnesses, and turning places like that into forgotten footnotes. Meanwhile, Claire was driven by something simpler, an almost obsessive need to uncover hidden truths. And that put her directly in the line of fire. At the end of the corridor, behind another reinforced door, a red light blinked intermittently. Claire's heart raced. It was still active, whatever it was. The red light pulsed irregularly, casting shadows that moved across the stone walls like living figures. Claire approached slowly, feeling the air grow heavier with each step. The sound of an old generator vibrated beneath her feet, almost imperceptible but constant. Someone still powered that place. "This shouldn't be working," Luc murmured, tilting his head as if trying to locate the source of the noise. Etienne did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the reinforced door ahead, where a nearly faded metal plate still partially revealed a sign in technical French: "Experimental Containment Zone." Claire photographed the inscription. "Lockdown from what?" "Something got out of control," Etienne said, too quietly to sound official. Before she could press it, a crack echoed through the tunnel. It didn't come from inside the room, but from the corridor they had passed through minutes before. The dry sound of stone being moved. Luc picked up the radio. "The east entrance is compromised. Someone forced the gate." Claire felt a rush of adrenaline. She didn't like the idea of civilians approaching a place like that, but she also realized that this external activity was reducing Etienne's room for maneuver. She took advantage of it. Without asking permission, he walked up to the door panel. The surface was covered in dust and rust, but when she pressed one of the corners, the blank display dimly lit up. A numerical sequence flashed, asking for a code. "Claire, don't touch that," ordered Etienne. She ignored it. The panel looked old, a model used in military installations in the 1980s. Claire recognized the shape. She had seen something similar during an investigation in an abandoned bunker near Toulon. She typed in a simple sequence: 1987, the same year the files had been erased. Nothing. He tried another. 1312, the year of the castle's original construction. The display emitted a low-pitched beep. The door moved a few centimeters, releasing a blast of icy air mixed with a sweet chemical odor. Luc pulled out his gun. "Shit!" Etienne closed his eyes for a moment, as if accepting inevitable defeat. "You just violated a federal seal." Claire felt the cold seep through her clothes. "So why was it so easy?" He didn't answer. The opening revealed a larger room, illuminated by partially burned-out fluorescent lamps. Inside, metal structures resembling hospital stretchers were fixed to the floor. Pipes ran along the walls, connected to now empty transparent cylinders. There were fingernail marks on the sides of some of the stretchers. Claire approached one of them. Small leather straps still hung from the restraints used to immobilize arms and legs. In the corner of the room, An old analog camera was positioned on a tripod, facing directly towards the center. That wasn't a prison. It was a laboratory. She felt her stomach clench. "What did they do here?" he asked. Luke looked away. Etienne walked to a metal cabinet built into the wall. He forced the door open with effort, revealing yellowed folders organized by date. Claire pulled one out at random. Medical reports, neurological charts, sensory deprivation tests. She flipped through the pages quickly, photographing them with her cell phone. Terms such as induction of dissociation, resistant subjects, and behavioral alteration, they appeared repeatedly. There were names, no codes, real people, residents of Montreval. "You used civilians," she said, her voice tense. "It was a pilot project," Etienne replied. "The 80s. The government feared ideological infiltration, internal terrorism, social collapse. They wanted to study psychological limits." Claire found a card marked as Subject 17, status, not recoverable. "Does unrecoverable mean dead?" Silence was answer enough. Luke's radio crackled again. "We have 3 individuals trying to enter through the courtyard. One of them is filming." Etienne ran his hand over his face. "This is getting out of control." Claire walked to the back of the room, where a second, smaller door remained closed. Unlike the first, this one had no electronic panel, just a mechanical lever. She pulled. The mechanism creaked loudly, its sound echoing throughout the underground complex. On the other side, a short corridor ended in a stone cell, reinforced with modern bars. Inside, there was only a chair fixed to the floor, and above it, a set of electrodes still connected to the ceiling. On the wall, someone had written with something dark, "They tried to change us. They tried to move us." Claire felt her eyes burning. "Is anyone still here?" he asked. Etienne took a while to reply. "Not officially." The conflict was now clear. On one side, Claire, with enough evidence to destroy reputations and trigger international investigations. On the other hand, there is a state apparatus prepared to bury everything again, and surrounding them, a castle too ancient to forget, but strong enough to keep secrets for decades. Hurried footsteps echoed from the surface. Shouting, camera flashes pierced through the upper windows. History was about to escape from the dungeons. Whether they wanted to or not, the distant sound of voices echoed through the makeshift ventilation ducts. Claire recognized the excited tone of onlookers, mixed with the impatience of private security guards trying to maintain control of the situation. The presence of civilians above them completely changed the game. Etienne left the main room and spoke in a low voice into the radio. "Activate perimeter isolation. No one enters, no one leaves." Luke watched the corridor, weapon still in hand, while 2 other agents emerged from the back of the gallery. Men of ordinary appearance, discreet clothing, movements too coordinated to appear improvised. Claire realized she had underestimated the size of the operation. She stepped away from the group and returned to the filing cabinet. Among the reports, she found a different envelope sealed with dried wax. Inside there was a handwritten letter, dated February 1986. The signature at the end caught his attention. Dr. Henri Beaumont. Claire recognized that name. Beaumont had been a respected neuroscientist whose career had ended abruptly after a vague accusation of ethical misconduct. Officially, he had retired and moved to Belgium. He never gave another interview. She started reading. The doctor described common symptoms among the subjects: prolonged disorientation, memory lapses, aggressive behavior followed by catatonic states. Later, he reported something even more disturbing. Several patients demonstrated synchronized responses to specific auditory stimuli, as if they shared an induced neurological pattern. It wasn't just psychological torture, it was an attempt at collective conditioning. Meanwhile, Etienne was talking to Luke in a corner. "The local press is already on its way," said the former soldier. "If they come in here, it's over." "We still have option B," Etienne replied. Luke frowned. "This will attract too much attention. We have no choice." Claire only heard fragments of the conversation, but it was enough for her to understand that they were considering a drastic measure. She quickly saved the images to cloud storage and sent a copy to a trusted contact in Paris with a short message: "If I disappear, publish everything." At the same time, a silent subplot was unfolding outside the castle. In the village, residents began to gather near the makeshift barriers. Among them was Madame Roussel, the baker. She recognized Claire's car parked in the distance and felt a pang in her chest. Other elderly people had also shown up, drawn by the unusual activity. They knew what that place represented. They knew that the past always returned whenever someone meddled too much in the wrong soil. Back in the dungeons, Claire found a small side room that didn't appear on the map. Inside, there was an old computer still connected to an emergency battery. The screen flickered, displaying a rudimentary interface. She sat down and pressed a few keys. A file opened automatically. List of names, dates of birth, addresses, status. More than half marked as reinstated. The rest, lost. Claire felt a lump forming in her throat. Reintegrated meant return to society after the experiments. People who went back home with altered minds, fragmented memories, perhaps impulses they never understood. She thought of the stories of unexplained outbreaks in small villages, of strange accidents, of cases of violence without apparent motive that appeared as brief notes in regional newspapers. Everything was starting to connect. Behind her, Etienne appeared silently. "You shouldn't have seen that." Claire stood up slowly. "How many?" He didn't answer immediately. 37 officially, probably more. "And did you participate?" His gaze wavered. "I was young. I worked in logistics. I believed I was helping to protect the country." Claire sensed a crack in the antagonist. Etienne wasn't just a cold executioner. He carried guilt, perhaps regret, but he continued to obey. The system has always needed people like that. A low alarm began to sound somewhere in the complex. Luke spoke loudly from the hallway. "We have press trying to force their way in. One of them is already broadcasting live." The time pressure was intensifying. Claire knew she had little time before everything would be sealed off or destroyed again. She needed to get out of there with physical evidence, not just digital files. She ran back to the main room and snatched one of the most complete folders from the cabinet. She put it in her backpack, ignoring Luke's immediate protest. "No," said Etienne, holding her arm. "This can't leave here." Claire pulled herself free. "It's already out. Even if they stop me, it's already online." He turned pale. Dust particles began to fall from the ceiling. Some heavy door was being opened above them. The subplots converged rapidly. The residents were awakened, the press arrived, and the agents were torn between obeying orders and avoiding a national scandal. The castle, once again, became the stage for a choice: to cover up or reveal. And Claire had no intention of allowing that horror to return to silence. The underground alarm grew louder, going from a discreet warning to a pulsating sound that reverberated through the stone walls. Claire felt the vibration rise up to her feet, as if the castle itself were reacting to the invasion. Etienne received a direct call on the communicator. "They breached the perimeter," a metallic voice reported. "We have a live broadcast happening now." He closed his eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. "Initiate the containment procedure." Claire realized it immediately. "You're going to try to destroy the evidence." "No," he replied. "I'll try to prevent this from turning into a national panic." Luke was already moving toward the main corridor, coordinating the other agents. One of them was carrying a heavy grey case marked with biohazard symbols. Claire swallowed hard. "What do you have there?" Luke avoided looking at her. "Expanding insulation foam. Once activated, it solidifies in seconds. It will seal entire tunnels." She understood. They were about to bury everything again, with them inside if necessary. Claire Corot. The journalist dashed down the side corridor, clutching her backpack to her chest. She needed to reach the stairs before the complex was sealed off. Behind her, Etienne's footsteps echoed. "Claire, get ready!" She didn't stop. She turned right, almost slipping on the damp floor, and reached the ancient circular room. Thick dust began to rise from the ceiling as deep vibrations shook the air. The castle was being sealed off from the inside. She had climbed halfway up the spiral staircase when Etienne caught up with her and gripped her arm tightly. "If you go out with this, people could die," he said, without shouting. "You don't understand what these files could cause." Claire turned, her face close to his. "People have already died." She ripped off her arm and continued climbing. At that moment, a scream echoed from the depths of the dungeons. He wasn't an agent. It was a human sound, hoarse, broken, like someone who hadn't used their own voice in a long time. Claire froze. Even Luke stopped. The sound was coming from the cell they had opened minutes earlier. "That's impossible," Etienne murmured. They ran back. The smaller door was open, and the light from the room revealed a figure slumped near the metal chair. A man who was too thin, with a long beard, and tattered clothes that looked decades old. His wrists bore deep marks, as if they had been repeatedly restrained. He was breathing. Claire felt her heart race. There is still one survivor. The man slowly raised his face. His eyes were red, but he was conscious. "Beaumont," she whispered. "He lied." Claire knelt beside him. "Who are you?" "Marcel Dupré," he replied with difficulty. "Subject 17. The same number as the card marked as unrecoverable. The turning point was materializing right there, before their eyes. Marcel had been officially declared dead in 1986, but he remained imprisoned for 40 years, kept alive by minimal automated protocols, forgotten in the deepest levels after a partial collapse of the system, a bureaucratic error, a man erased from the world. Etienne seemed to be in shock. That wasn't in the reports. Marcel grabbed Claire's coat with surprising force. "They tried to reprogram us," he said, his voice faltering. "Sounds, lights. They wanted to create obedience without conscience. Some broke, others turned into monsters. I pretended." Claire felt tears burning in her eyes, but she remained focused. "Can you walk?" Marcel shook his head negatively. From the hallway, Luke shouted, "We have 30 seconds before total lockdown." Claire made an instant decision. She put Marcel's arm around her shoulders. "Let's take him." Etienne stared at her. "It's too late." But at that moment something changed in him. He stepped forward and helped Claire lift Marcel. The antagonist was crossing his own line. They ran together through the gallery, while the expanding foam began to fill cracks and secondary passages, swelling like a living substance. The air became thick, chemical, difficult to breathe. Above them, voices and cameras. The truth was about to emerge. And now there was a living witness. Not just documents, not just files. A man. The system could erase papers, but he could not undo 40 years of suffering etched into a body. When they reached the main staircase, natural light flooded the tunnel. Claire heard shouts from journalists, flashes, microphones. History escaped from the dungeons, irreversibly. The cold evening air hit Claire's face as they emerged from inside the castle. The sudden change in light made her blink repeatedly, while dozens of cameras instantly turned to the trio. "Who is this man? What happened down there? Is the government hiding something?" The questions overlapped, spoken in rapid and urgent French. Luke struggled to make his way through, but it was too late for complete control. Marcel could barely stand, propped up between Claire and Etienne, his frail body contrasting sharply with the chaos around him. Claire raised her voice. "This man was imprisoned in the dungeons for almost 40 years. There is documentation proving that local residents were used in psychological experiments conducted by the French state during the 1980s. A heavy silence fell for a few seconds. Then it exploded. Reporters moved forward. Residents began shouting familiar names. Madame Roussel put her hand to her mouth upon recognizing Marcel Dupré. "Oh my God! It's Madeleine's son!" Ambulances arrived minutes later, called by someone from the press. Paramedics attended to Marcel. placing him on a stretcher as he mumbled incoherent words, reacting strangely to the sounds of the sirens. Claire handed some of the folders to the journalists closest to her. "Everything is here. Medical reports, lists of subjects, dates. I've already sent copies to Paris." Etienne watched in silence, his face rigid. His radio played non-stop. Calls from superiors, conflicting orders. He knew his career was over, perhaps even more than that. In the village, the news spread like wildfire. People who had lost relatives began arriving at the castle. Some wept, others screamed. An elderly man tried to cross the makeshift barrier, shouting the name of his brother, who had disappeared in 1987. The local police, clearly unprepared for that level of exposure, tried to organize the perimeter, but there was no way to contain the human tide. Claire was pulled into an impromptu press conference in front of the castle facade. Microphones were piled up beneath his face. "How did you find out? How many victims? Does this involve current authorities?" She answered only the essentials. "We are still gathering numbers, but this was not an isolated incident. It was a structured program, and there was a cover-up for decades." Meanwhile, in Paris, crisis advisors were already working frantically. The Ministry of Culture released a generic statement referring to old technical installations and promising a full investigation. The Ministry of the Interior did not respond to initial requests for comment. On social media, videos of Marcel's departure went viral. A hashtag Montrevalite was rapidly rising among the most talked-about topics in France. Etienne stepped away from the commotion and sat down on a stone block near the gate. For the first time since Claire had met him, he looked old. She approached. "You could have prevented it." He nodded slowly. "I could." "Why didn't you do it?" "He took a long time. Because I saw his face, and I remembered the reports that I myself had filed." Claire realized then the true weight of the consequences, not only institutional, but personal. Luc was detained by local police, along with 2 officers, while others managed to leave discreetly before their names were recorded. A formal investigation was opened that same night. Marcel was taken to a hospital in Toulouse under escort. His condition was critical but stable. Claire received a message from her contact in Paris. "The files have already reached 3 major newsrooms. This isn't going to die." She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the exhaustion finally catch up with her. Montreval Castle, now illuminated by press spotlights, looked different, less menacing, more exposed, like an old wound finally reopened. But Claire knew that this was only the beginning. Legal proceedings would take years. Many of those responsible would never be brought to justice. Some families would never have complete answers. The truth had come to light, but it carried with it an avalanche of pain, anger, and uncertainty. And somewhere in the country, other forgotten facilities may still exist. Montreval was not necessarily unique. The question that echoed now in collective silence was simple and devastating. How many more? 3 weeks have passed since Montreval. For Claire, time had become a succession of airports, newsrooms, and interview rooms. She slept little. She ate when she remembered. Her face appeared on television news programs in various countries, always accompanied by the same images. Her leaving the castle, Marcel being placed in the ambulance, the medieval gate surrounded by police. The story had grown beyond what he had imagined. Parliamentary committees were opened. The Ministry of the Interior officially confirmed the existence of an experimental program of psychological observation between 1984 and 1989. The word human experiment, it was never used in the press releases, but the leaked documents said so themselves. Claire now needed to learn a new kind of survival, dealing with public pressure. He received anonymous threats almost daily. Some were vague, others too detailed to ignore. He began to vary his routes, change hotels frequently, and keep his cell phone turned off during the early morning hours. Even so, it continued. In Toulouse, Marcel remained hospitalized in a protected ward. Doctors diagnosed severe neurological damage, but also something unexpected. His lucidity was slowly improving. He was able to hold short conversations and recognize people from his past. Claire visited him whenever she could. On the third visit, he was able to hold a cup by himself. "I thought the world had ended," she said weakly. "Down there, time didn't exist." Claire sat down beside the bed. "It's not over, but it has changed." Marcel closed his eyes for a few seconds. "You got me out of there. We took it off." She didn't want to carry that alone. Meanwhile, Etienne Lacroix had been officially removed from his duties. His name appeared in preliminary reports as a logistics facilitator, not as the project's architect. Even so, he was regularly summoned for testimony. He called Claire only once. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just needed you to know there are other places like Montreval. Some have already been neutralized, others haven't." Claire wrote down every word. That phone call redefined his mission. She was no longer just a journalist who had uncovered a case. She had become someone who needed to follow old trails, cross-reference fragmented files, and connect erased dots. He began working with a small group of investigative reporters from Belgium, Italy, and Germany. Together, they created an independent database of suspicious locations, forgotten military contracts, and recurring names in documents. It was a slow process, but it's real. Claire has also changed personally. Before, she used to act alone, relying only on her instincts. Now she was learning to delegate, to accept protection, to share information before putting herself at risk. Her experience in Montreval had taught her that courage without strategy was merely recklessness. In Marseille, she returned to the apartment for the first time since the incident. The plants were dry, the mailboxes full. She spent hours organizing papers, dusting, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. In a drawer, she found her first press badge from when she still covered cultural events. He smiled briefly. That Claire seemed to belong to another life. On the other side of town, families from Montreval began receiving initial compensation from the government. Some accepted it silently, others refused, demanding public trials. An impromptu memorial sprang up near the castle with old photos, flowers, and candles. The village would never be the same. Claire went back there once discreetly. He walked to the closed gate and touched the cold stone of the wall. He felt no fear, only a deep weight. She understood now that revealing the truth did not bring immediate relief. It brought responsibility, but also growth. Claire was no longer just someone who exposed hidden stories. It was part of them. And despite the exhaustion, despite the threats, despite the sleepless nights, she knew she wouldn't be able to stop. Because every file opened, every witness found, every silence broken was a small victory against a system built to forget. And she had already seen what happened when the world chose not to look. Winter was beginning to set in the south of France when Claire received the encrypted email. She was in Lyon, sharing a small table with two German colleagues, reviewing spreadsheets of old contracts related to the Ministry of Defense. The coffee was getting cold next to the laptop when the notification appeared on the screen. Sender unknown. Subject, Site B17 is still active. Claire felt her pulse quicken. She opened the message silently. Inside, there were geographical coordinates, a blurry aerial photograph, and a short phrase. They are transferring physical files. There are only a few days left. Claire immediately recognized the pattern. B17 was a recurring code in Montreval's documents, always associated with structural decommissioning funds. It had never been identified as a specific location until now. She shared the information with the international group. In less than an hour, they were able to cross-reference the data with old military maps. The location was in the French Alps near the Italian border at an old meteorological research station abandoned in the 1990s. Very isolated, very convenient. Claire understood that this was the last loose end. If those in charge were still moving physical files, it meant that important evidence had not been digitized. Perhaps complete lists, perhaps original recordings of the experiments. She called Etienne. He answered after several rings. "I told you I didn't want any more involvement," he said. "They are cleaning up B-17. Silence. "Are you sure? I have coordinates and recent images." His breathing became audible. "Then it's now or never," he murmured. "If they erase this, Montreval will become the exception, not the rule." Claire closed her eyes for a second. "Will you help me?" The response took a while. Not officially. That was the most she had hoped for. The tension was building in layers. German colleagues reported that an unmarked transport truck had been seen leaving the Alpine region that morning. In Belgium, a fellow journalist confirmed unusual activity in bank accounts linked to former medical suppliers to the French government. The pieces were lining up too quickly. Claire booked a rental car and began assembling a small team: a freelance cameraman, an Italian reporter, and a digital security technician. It wasn't a police operation. It was a race against final erasure. Before leaving Lyon, Claire visited Marcel. He was stronger, sitting in a chair near the window. "I'm going to the Alps," she said. Marcel nodded slowly. They always destroyed everything at the end of each phase. Not this time. He held her hand. "Don't go alone." She squeezed back. "I am not going." The road snaked between mountains covered in light snow. The sky was heavy and grey, and the cell phone signal fluctuated as they drove on. Claire felt that familiar mix of focus and fear, the same mental state that had preceded Montreval. But now she knew exactly what she was fighting against. The car radio picked up a short news report. The government had announced the creation of a special committee to investigate past administrative excesses. Claire hung up. Committees came later. She needed to act sooner. As they approached the coordinates, they saw new fences, and a small train stopped near a concrete shed, partially buried in the hillside. Two men were carrying metal boxes into a white van with no license plates. Claire parked some distance away and picked up the camera. The climax was approaching. If they went in there, they could recover definitive evidence. If they were seen, they could be arrested. Or worse. She took a deep breath. The past was being packed away. And that was probably the last chance to prevent it from disappearing altogether. The wind cut across Claire's face as she observed the shed buried in the hillside through the camera lens. Fine snowflakes began to fall silently, making everything more muffled, as if the mountain were absorbing the sounds. The white van was almost full. 4 men worked quickly without talking. Each metal box was carried with excessive care, as if it contained something fragile or dangerous. "We have about 5 minutes, whispered Marco, the cameraman, adjusting the focus. Claire surveyed the area. There were no official signs, just a small pole with a surveillance camera pointed towards the main road. The side of the shed was partially hidden by pine trees. She made the decision. "Let's go to the left. Sophia, stay in the car. If anything goes wrong, call everyone." The Italian reporter nodded, her face pale. Claire, Marco, and the digital technician Jules hunched forward through the thin snow. The cold seeped through their gloves, but the adrenaline masked the pain. They arrived at the side of the warehouse without being seen. A service door was ajar. Inside, the air was dry, artificially heated. Fluorescent lights illuminated shelves full of numbered boxes. In the back, 2 old computers remained on, displaying progress bars. Jules ran towards them. "They're transferring data to external servers," he murmured. "But these files here," he pointed to the boxes, "are physical originals." Claire opened one of them. Inside, there were hand-labeled magnetic tapes, medical notebooks, and black-and-white photographs of patients strapped to stretchers. Montreval was no exception. She was a model. She felt a strange chill run down her spine. "Recording everything," she told Marco. At that moment, the main door of the warehouse burst open. "Stop!" Police! 3 armed agents entered quickly, weapons drawn. For a second, Claire thought it was all over. Then he noticed something strange. The uniforms had no official identification. One of the men spoke in French with a strong Swiss accent. They weren't police. They were hired. The leader advanced. "You don't have permission to be here." Claire raised the camera. "This is being broadcast live." That was a lie. But he hesitated. The tension hung in the air. That's when a familiar voice echoed from the side entrance. "Let's put down our weapons." Etienne Lacroix appeared, accompanied by 2 royal policemen from the local gendarmerie. The final antagonist was traversing the stage. "This facility is under federal investigation," Etienne continued, showing a document. "Any attempt to remove material is obstruction of justice." The armed men exchanged quick glances. One of them took a step back. Another one turned off the radio. Claire realized that this could turn into a confrontation. She moved forward a little. "We already have images, copies, and witnesses. Even if you take everything away, it won't erase what Montreval revealed." The leader of the contractors assessed the situation. 3 against 5. Isolated mountain, without visible official support. He made a brief gesture. "Retreat." The men left in silence, getting into the van and driving off down the narrow road. Claire released the breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. Etienne closed his eyes briefly. "They were acting outside of any legal framework," he said. "Dirty outsourcing, very common in the final years of the program." Jules finished copying the main discs. "We have everything." Claire walked to a metal table at the back of the shed. Among the documents, she found a red envelope marked with the same triangular symbol as the dungeons. Inside, there was a final report. Title: Montreval Project, National Feasibility Assessment. She flipped through it quickly. The last page offered a terse conclusion. "The method is functional but unstable. Large-scale application presents a high risk of social collapse. Gradual closure and destruction of records are recommended." Claire felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't just a historic scandal. It was proof that someone had seriously considered reprogramming part of the French population. She looked up. Marco continued filming. Snow was coming in through the open door. The mountains watched in silence. The climax didn't come in the form of an explosion or a chase. It came as a revelation. Claire's transformation was complete there. She was no longer just chasing after the news. She was now actively preventing truths from being erased. And for the first time, the system had been forced to retreat into open field. The impact of the revelations in the Alps was immediate. In less than 24 hours, images of the warehouse circulated throughout Europe. Major newspapers ran headlines about secret files, human experiments, and parallel structures of institutional erasure. The French Parliament convened an extraordinary session. 3 former high-ranking officials resigned for personal reasons. There was no more room for vague statements. The government officially confirmed the existence of Project Montreval and admitted that it had been just one of several behavioral research programs conducted during the Cold War. An independent international commission was created, including observers from the European Union and human rights organizations. Processes began to form like successive waves. Some powerful names managed to disappear before they were even mentioned. Others do not. Claire testified before a parliamentary committee for almost 6 hours. She handed over physical copies of the reports, presented the warehouse recordings, and described in detail the state in which Marcel was found. She didn't raise her voice even once. It wasn't necessary. The facts spoke for themselves. Marcel Dupré, still recovering, appeared in a brief hospital broadcast. His frail face became a symbol of a forgotten generation. He couldn't say much. He only said, "We were people." Not numbers. That was enough. Montreval has been officially reclassified as a site of human rights crimes. The dungeons underwent a full forensic examination, now under international supervision. Forensic teams found biological remains in areas that had previously been sealed. confirming deaths that were never recorded in civil registries. The village received collective psychological support. Some families were finally able to bury their dead. Others received only documents. Etienne Lacroix was included as a key collaborator in the investigation. His partial immunity came in exchange for maps, names, and logistical routes used over decades. He accepted without negotiation. Claire met him one last time in Paris, outside an official building. "I'm not going to hide," he said. "I'm going to live with it." Claire nodded. There was no easy redemption there. The international team of journalists published a joint dossier called The Facilities of Silence. The material revealed at least 5 additional locations linked to the same program, spread across France, Belgium, and northern Italy. None of them are active yet, but they're all real. Claire returned to Marseille weeks later. For the first time in months, he slept through the night. He woke to the sound of traffic and the smell of coffee wafting from the street. The world continued on, indifferent and resilient as always. She walked out onto the balcony and watched people going to work, children with backpacks, and elderly people reading newspapers on park benches. That was the reason. Neither complete justice nor clean endings, but transparency. She opened her laptop and began writing her next article. The cycle did not end, but it had been broken. And for Claire, that was already a form of victory. 6 months later, Montreval Castle remained closed to the public, surrounded by white fences and discreet security. Where there had once been silence, there were now explanatory plaques, dates, and names. Memory. Marcel Dupré walked slowly through the garden of the rehabilitation center, leaning on a cane. He still had lapses, still woke up some nights confused, but he could already smile effortlessly. Claire visited him whenever she could. One afternoon, he handed her a small folded piece of paper. It was a simple drawing of the dungeon with an open door. Claire put it in her coat pocket. On the road back to Marseille, she passed vineyards bathed in sunlight and thought about how many stories still lay dormant beneath the European soil, waiting for someone willing to listen. Some truths should never have been buried. Stories like Montreval's don't exist just to shock. They exist to remind us that the truth needs courageous voices to come to light. If this story touched you, share it, comment, and reflect. How many secrets still remain hidden around us? Follow more true and fictional stories inspired by human mysteries, forgotten places, and buried truths. Your participation keeps these narratives alive. Write what you thought, say where you're watching from, and what topics you'd like to see in future stories. Because as long as someone is listening, the memory doesn't die.